Let's start with the first session of today. I'm the moderator of this session. There will be 4 speakers talking. So it's important to know for the speakers that they have 20 minutes of presentation and that we have a discussion after the 4 presentations. So save your questions until the very end of this session. Well, of course, it's an honor to introduce the first speaker of today, Effie Margaritis. She's an associate professor at the Science and Technology and Archaeological Cultural Research Center at the Cyprus Institute. And she's, of course, very well known as an archaeobotanist and always very eager to know more about archaeobotany. So I'm looking forward to hear her presentation, Botanical Offerings, Exploring the Ritual Use of Plants in Ancient Greek Sanctuaries. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to talk about plant remains and ritual. So I hope that this is going to be interesting for you. Don't be afraid. This is the only slide that has text on it, but because it's a lot to actually put it in a context, I'm going to read some of it. The rest you can read it yourself. Food is a dynamic entity in a wide range of social relationships, ranging from private to public situations. So what we are looking for in archaeology. And the consumption of the same food can be significant on a number of levels, from daily consumption to special events, marking particular occasions of rites of passage. One of these rites of passage, of course, the ritual and funerary practices. And food production, distribution, and consumption were central to any negotiation and reproduction of social relationships. Therefore, domestic life and the agricultural circle also have a ritual aspect. In this respect, the ritual context will be compared with domestic assemblages in order to explore human choices and differences between everyday and ritual life. In a nutshell, what people are doing during ritual practices, are they using the same plant remains and food remains that they do at their domestic life? And the case studies we're going to use, they're funerary, but I'm going only to touch on them, and I'm going to focus mainly on sanctuaries. So this is the site of VII, Akastipalia, final Neolithic early Bronze site in the middle of the Aegean, excavated by the University of Joanina. In this promontory here, a lot of graves have been found, but the interesting things, there are inhumations buried in these vessels. So they were in position buried in the vessels, and when we were excavating, we found animal remains inside the vessels and charred plant remains. The interesting thing is that because it's an inhumation, we have found a charred plant remains. So the question is that were they deposited already charred inside the burial vessels? The same goes with the site of Petras, 3rd millennium BCE in Crete. And here there are house tombs, so graves that they look actually like the houses. On the basis of the analysis of the human remains, we have secondary deposition of human remains, movement of bones in various stages of compositions around inside the house tombs, movement within the house tombs in different times, and temporary repositories and ossuaries. So a lot of commingled human remains. What we have found there next to the bones, but also in different areas of the house tombs, are charred again plant remains, mainly grapes and olives, but very interesting found concentrations of flax. And this is interesting because in Greece, in late Bronze Age Greece, we have some remains of flax, but Petras, a ritual site, a funerary site, has revealed the largest quantities that we have for this period in Crete. And here we have also complete whole grapefruits, not only the pips, but whole grapes. Again, this is the pattern, a similar pattern that what I said earlier, that these are charred in areas that we don't have a charred destruction or cremations. Here, an inhumation again, 2nd millennium, the site of Aspis in the Peloponnese, an inhumation, and next to it we have found 2 complete olive fruits, not the pips again, but fruits. And in a similar situation, contemporary with the other side, the site of Kira, where it's excavated by the French Archaeological Mission in Greece, again an inhumation, and next to it a very nice concentration of grass species. It's not only about what kind of plant remains we found next to the bodies, it is that we found charred plant remains next to inhumation. So again, the question is, where deposited charred next to the body? And if they did, why? The final funerary example that I'm going to talk about is the site of Cicalario at Naxos in the Cyclades, where you have these circular structures, and inside you have a lot of burials and cremations in this now. But next to them is that we have found a lot of plant remains with the most interesting and lot of concentrations of whole figs. There, the question is that because we have cremation, okay, so you have a medium of fire and you expect the plant remains possibly to be preserved. To have a cremation, you reach high temperatures, and the question there is that in what stage of the cremation or the ritual were the plant remains deposited there? Because if they were from the cremation, the very high temperature would have preserved the plant remains and it's in such a good conditions. Moving to the actual theme of the lecture, which is actually sanctuaries, you can see that we have found some plant remains in ritual context in other areas, but until now, what we had found is the ritual dining at the sanctuary of Demeter and Hora Corinth, which is published, and the sanctuary of Poseidon at Phoros. But these kind of plant remains, they came from dining areas. They were a refuse of dining within the sanctuary. They were not a part of the altar. So this is significant. So what it has come from the altar is from sanctuary of Ira at Samos, where since 1995, Kuchan have found, I don't know if I spelled it correctly, pronounced it correctly, waterlogged remains. And then I have studied charred plant remains. And you had a wealth of waterlogged remains, and then some charred remains showing the difference in preservation between waterlogged and charred plant remains. So that was about it, what we had until very recently in Greece. And then the German Archaeological School in Athens have started excavating the sanctuary of Kalapodi, which is dedicated to Apollo of Aber. And here it is in central Greece. And the great thing about this sanctuary is its continuity. We have occupation level use of the sanctuary from the Mycenaean period up to the Roman times. So I'm going to focus in two, you can see one temple after or top of the other. I'm going to focus on Temple 3, which is at the end of the Bronze Age, and Temple 7, which is the Archaic period and the 7th century. So here you can see Temple, South Temple 2, how it looks like. Here is, and this is the early Archaic with the Escara and then different temples. And very luckily, the Kalapodi sanctuary has been sampled for plant remains since 1993 by the late Helmut Kroll. And then the new excavations, I was in charge of the plant remains. And what is very, very interesting is the very, very well preserved concentrations of plant remains. So it's not a one seat here, one seat there, which is actually indicative of remains of food refuse, but you have stored crops, mostly cereals and pulses, but I'll come back to that. And here is the early Archaic sanctuary, and you can see it here, which again, you have concentrations of crops. Here is some cereals and pulses. And if we go again to the South Temple 2, you see that most of the plant remains are cereals with some pulses and some wild taxa. One of them, the wild, are poppy seeds, but concentration of poppy seeds, which we can say at some point that they have medicinal maybe use. Certainly, in some cases, they have ritual use, and we know that because of the vessels with the shape of poppy seed on their neck, which have been used in ritual context. The main question here with these stored crops is the following: were stored to be in the sanctuary to be used as feasting? So you had stored crops and then you had a feasting event and you were using them. Or where they deliberately burned as an offering. This is very difficult to see archaeologically because the taphonomy, as you can understand, it's very complicated, but these are very, very important questions. As we had stored crops, we have found a weevil inside a pulse. Here, this is a faba bee, and we have found pellets of rodents. So this you had activity of microfauna there. But one of the most important things that we have found actually remains of food, so processed food. Was it bread? Was it something else? We don't know. We're in the process of analyzing that. Andreas knows better than me that it's very difficult to understand what it is. It requires a lot of experimental work, which we undertake. But we have processed food. There it is. And if we go to the later periods, you do have, for example, Xenophon describes what you would actually find in a sanctuary. And if you compare all the sanctuaries that we have archaeobotanical remains from Greece, and you can see it here. You can see a variety of cereals and pulses. And I'll come back to that in a moment, that you don't have a lot of differences between domestic and actually ritual context. What they were eating in their domestic life, they were using in their ritual context, with some minor maybe addition, but I'll come back to that. So, according to Xenophon, these things you should actually find in a sanctuary. And at Kalapodi, we have found all this, and this is olive, of course, and poppy seed, which you can have oil from. The other case study is the altar of Zeus at the Mount Erykion in the center of the Peloponnese, and excavated by the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. Here is the altar. We're actually excavating the altar, and it is again a great opportunity to see continuity of ritual from the Mycenaean period to the Roman period. And here, this is what you can see is that, again, we have a lot of food residue, so processed food or bread, they were deposited in the altar. What is very, very interesting, again, and this is the word of Brita Stalbovic from Tübingen, is the continuity in the thessia, the sacrifice of the bones of animals that we know from the classical period, but it goes back to the Mycenaean period. So you can see the ritual activity goes back to the Mycenaean period and continues to later period. So in 2 by 2 meters square, which was the altar, it was erected 874 sheep and goat. So you can imagine, multiply that to the unexcavated area of the altars and see how many animals they were actually sacrificed at the sanctuary. And here is what we have found, mainly cereals, some white plants, but here are these very nice votive breads that we have from the sanctuary of Dimitar Kori, that it shows what they were offering actually in the sanctuaries. Here is a sanctuary of Artemis at Amarithos in central Greece, where again, we haven't found the altar, but we have a series of hearths from the Iron Age and the Archaic period that, again, mostly they were deposited, we have found cereals, and the sanctuary of Posidora Telikon, again in the Peloponnese, where we have a difference there, and we have a lot of fruits. And this is a piece of a whole grapefruit, and you can see the grape seed inside. So, altars and sanctuaries. In order to understand what we are missing from the archaeobotanical record, we had an experiment. We construct an altar with a lot of wood. We put inside some of the vessels fruits and cereals and food that we have found in the archaeobotanical record. And of course, then we have put a lot of animals as well. Thighs, according to the later sources, what was actually offered at the altars. And we had them in baskets as well to see how they survived, inside vessels, and then we threw also some cereals and pulses while the fire was there without any container. Here it is how it evolved, that this is the fire. When it's very high temperatures, I don't think that they had that high temperatures, so that was how it looked like. And here is the tail. And from all of you that you know about sanctuaries, it's a very, very important thing how the tail of the goat actually turns, because people, we are actually trying to see the future because of the movement of the tail. And you're going to see at the very short video that we have, and I'm finishing there. This is how we construct the fire. What we're going to do after that, we have it covered, and we're going to excavate it. We did that in October. We haven't excavated it yet to actually see how these plant remains and animal remains reacted to the weather and the deposition of the soil and everything. I want to show you the tail. You see, yes. So that was in ancient times. That would be a marvelous show there, and some people would say how the future of a war or something else would go. So to conclude, what we had when you see and when you actually understand the taphonomy of how plant remains are actually preserved in funerary practices or in sanctuaries, it's a very complicated matter, because again, were they deposited charred, or actually they were offering food and without being charred, but being charred during the process. The main thing that I want you to take with you is that you don't have any difference between the species that you use in ritual practices and the species that you have in your domestic life. And of course, this is something for me at least to actually expect, because ritual and domesticity go hand in hand. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Effie, for being so much in time. Excellent. And also for showing us this excellent video, which was breathtaking, I have to say. Okay, I move now to the second speaker of this session, Paulina Komar. So at the Polish Center of Mediterranean Archaeology, University of Warsaw. Yes? Okay. And you're going to talk about the feeding the empire shifts in amphora trade during late antiquity. And I'm really looking forward to your presentation, because I'm also looking at amphorae and, of course, the transport of amphorae in maritime archaeology. So please take the floor.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to take part at this conference. So today I would like to show you some patterns of amphora distributions, especially during the late antiquity. And I will also propose some hypotheses of what it may mean for the nature of the economy, how it changed between the early empire and late antiquity. So the presentation will be based on amphoras, and mostly diagnostic fragments, so rims, bases, and handles of amphoras. And amphoras were chosen here because these are mass-produced pottery vessels. They preserve very well. I mean, the fragments are big enough to make the identification of the amphora type quite easy. They are also very well studied. I mean, the origin and content of most of amphora forms is relatively well known. And they are also relatively representative as proxies for long-distance transport. They were occasionally reused, but mostly for the transport and storage of local goods, not for example, it's rather unlikely. There's only one case of this, that, for example, Aegean amphoras contained fish sauce, fish products from the Adriatic. And what is also very interesting is that they carried staples. So wine, olive oil, and fish products mostly. And therefore they provide evidence for the movement of those basic goods that were fundamental elements of everyday diet of actually all social strata. So the data looks like this. I mean, for late antiquity, I analyzed amphoras from 5 contexts. There will be Rome, North Adriatic area, so Aquileia, Verona, Padua, Ravenna, Ephesos, Cyprus, Paphos, Amathus, and Curion, and Gallia Narbonensis, mostly amphoras found around Marseille. And here also you see those gray circles or ovals, they show the areas that produced amphoras, the goods transported in amphoras in antiquity. The database of amphoras the study is based on is dated from the 3rd century to the 7th century. And first I analyzed some proportions of amphoras, but then because I've noticed plenty of differences in these proportions, and I wanted to check whether the proportion of amphoras is somehow related with the distance from the origin to the destination. And in order to do it, I used the kind of basic statistical method, which is called regression analysis. And everyone probably knows regression from grammar school. We usually had to draw plenty of functions, and we had their formulas, which means that y, which is a dependent variable, depends somehow on x, which is independent variable. And the relation between the two is described by other parameters here, a and b. So basically, the regression analysis helps us to check whether our data points have a certain scheme or pattern that can be described by this mathematical formula. What is very important in the linear regression is the so-called R-square, which is a coefficient of correlation that varies from 0 to 1. 1 means a total correlation. 100% of data can be explained by the regression line or regression formula. 0 means there is no correlation. Well, basically, we talk about correlation when there is 0.5. So at least 50% of data agrees with a certain pattern. And in this study, I treat amphora proportions as a dependent variable, while the distance from the origin to the destination is independent variable, so it doesn't change. However, we are not talking here about the distance in kilometers, so linear distance, but the distance in time, so the time of the journey from one place to another. And to get this parameter, I used Orbis, which is a network model of the Roman world. For now, the best tool of simulating movements in the Roman Empire. So you can simulate how the travel looked like between 2 points when you use the fastest, the cheapest, and the shortest way in different times of the year, and using different means of transport. There could be civilian transport, military transport. You could use sea or just land transport, and so on. So I used the cheapest route here, and to check whether, let's say, the transport costs governed the trade in amphora products. In the market economy, we should observe a certain relation between the distribution of goods and their transport costs, while in the, let's say, a command or clan economy, we shouldn't see any correlation like this. And what do amphoras show us? So here you see some regression lines, and well, sorry about all these graphs with plenty of dots. We are still working on them with Mateusz Polakowski, who is a student of mine, and he did these graphs using R environment, but it can be also done in Excel, which provides the same thing. And when you look at these lines here, which represent the proportions of different amphora types in different areas. Here we have Aquileia, Cyprus, Ephesos, Hispalis, and Rome. The amphora types are like Aegean, Adriatic, Tyrrhenian, Botanical, Gallic, and so on. We can see that most of the dots are quite close to the other, so they are close to the line, so they agree with a pattern. There are some exceptions, like here, the so-called outliers. These are Botanical and Aegean amphoras in Rome, and thanks to other discoveries like Monte Testaccio, Nuovo Mercato di Testaccio, we know that these products were particularly common, so we can suspect that there were certain, let's say, non-market links between these areas and Rome. When we look at the coefficient of correlation, we see that in all cases the correlation is very high, almost close to 1. So 90% of all the data agrees with the pattern. Rome is one exception, but This is mostly due to those Vatican and Aegean amphoras. However, overall, the coefficient of correlation for all amphoras is above 0.5, which means that we can say that in the early empire, transport costs actually moved goods across the Mediterranean. But in the late antiquity, we see something completely different. So the dots are more dispersed. It's actually difficult to find a pattern, although the R square, like for the total of amphoras, is not very, very low. We see that there are big differences, like here in different destinations. So no correlation for Aquileia, high correlation for Ephesus, no correlation for Marseille, high correlation for Paphos, no correlation for Rome, which means that basically in the Western and Central Mediterranean, the trade looked somehow differently than we would expect. There must have been some non-market element that governed the trade. And then because what I've noticed analyzing just the proportions of amphoras, the biggest change was in the Levantine and African amphoras. So I made regressions only for like this type of amphoras for early empire and late antiquity. And here we see early empire. So these are Levantine amphoras in Paphos, Ephesus, Adriatic, Italy, Rome, and Hispalis. And we see again that those dots are close to the line and R square is quite high. In the late antiquity, no correlation again. Here is the proportion of Levantine amphoras in Cyprus, here in Ephesus, here is Rome, Adriatic, Italy, and Gaul. So there are even more numerous in the western part of the empire than in the eastern, where they should be more common, assuming that market ruled the amphora distribution. The similar thing we can see here. I don't know why there is no R square here for the early empire, but again, we see correlation. The correlation here was around 0.882, so also close to 1. And here for late antiquity, the correlation of the proportion of African amphoras at the distance is very, very low. We clearly see that very far from Africa, this is the Adriatic Italy, the proportion of African amphoras is extremely high. Obviously, one explanation could be that this change in let's say, amphora evidence is caused by the fact that during late antiquity, amphoras were substituted by barrels. So most of the Western amphoras, they disappear from the record. This could, of course, explain like the change in amphora proportions, but not their correlation with the distance. We did another study to check it. We did some agent-based modeling, and the results of it also suggest that unlikely than Western goods were in fact transported in barrels. They must have disappeared due to probably the crisis of the 3rd century and other things. What is another thing that might be relevant here is that, especially in Palestine, we observe both a technological development in especially wine production, and also we observe that especially Palestine starts to be like a center of producing surpluses on an almost massive scale. The best example is the Yavne area in the Gaza district, a site dated to the 4th and 3rd century AD, where 2 million liters of wine might have been produced per year. So there are plenty of fermentation vats, pressing facilities with high number of presses. There are also amphora kilns. So we see that everything was designed for export. And according to economic rules, when the scale of production increases, the cost of one entity of a product is lower. So in this case, the cost of producing of one amphora of gathered wine is lower. So its price on the market, let's say, is lower, and then it can be more easily distributed all over the world because it will be more affordable for the people. However, in this case, especially in the case of basic goods, the transport costs will be, let's say, a higher proportion of the price than the real value. So, for example, it is profitable to export luxuries on longer distances because the transport cost will be just a small part of the price. But with things like wine, olive oil, and, grain, it's really unprofitable. Also, we observe that there are new areas, especially in the eastern part of the Mediterranean or in the Pontic area, that produce wines, and that most of these wines, at least those we have the evidence about, are sweet and white, like, for example, Bithynian wine, which is a kind of a new thing on the market. It was made from sun-dried grapes, so it was of the passu type, which means that consumer preferences might have influenced the patterns. So people wanted to drink only sweet wines, which during the early empire were produced on Crete, in Africa and in Cilicia. Later, probably they started to be produced in higher number of areas. Interesting fact about the possible wine from Bithynia is the chemical study we did of the samples of Sinopean amphoras, of the so-called Sinopean D type. These amphoras definitely transported wine from the South Pontic area. We found that some of these amphoras in Gonio or Apsaros, which was a Roman fortress during the 2nd and 3rd century of AD, and later during Justinian's times. And what we observed in one sample of this amphora is that there was a biomarker for wine, the tartalic acid, malic acid, which is usually among the fruit acids present in wine, but there was no syringic acid. And syringic acid is a biomarker of wines that were made with skin contact, usually red wines. So this study more or less confirms the theory regarding the fact that the taste for wines might have changed during late antiquity. Nevertheless, even if we assume that there were new main suppliers of basic foodstuffs, that there was a change in trading routes, because of obviously like Egyptian grain travels to Constantinople during late antiquity rather to Rome, and also considering that there were pilgrimages which connected better the western and the eastern part of the world. Even if we have some evidence that the church might have been like a new producer and trader of wine, there are during late antiquity there are plenty of, especially in the east, wine and olive presses associated with churches or monasteries, while earlier we do not see it in Roman or Greek temples. So, but still, the results of the study, they show that something must have changed in the nature of economy, because during late antiquity, distance does not rule goods distributions anymore, as it did during the early empire, and it suggests that late antique economy was more similar to, let's say, centrally planned or command economy than the economy of the early empire. That is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paulina, for this fascinating story on wine distribution in late antiquity. And as I said, you can raise your questions at the end of this session, because we now move to the third speaker. Luckily, the first two speakers were very much in time, so I hope this will also happen with third speaker. I hope I pronunciate her name correctly, Jana Kopáčková. Who's an independent researcher working with wine and oil, as we see from the presentation, and especially in Roman Histria and Dalmatia. So she will talk about late antique urban production of wine and olive oil in the eastern Adriatic area. So please take the floor.
Good morning, everyone. And first, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to attend again. It's my second Colloquia Ceranea, so thank you very much. And today I will speak about the late antique urban production of wine and olive oil in the Eastern Adriatic area. So first, let's see what I mean by the Eastern Adriatic. I am focusing on the Istria, which was part of the Regio Decima of Italy, and the province of Dalmatia. This is quite large area, and in the modern countries, it's Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, and part of Albania. I am focusing on the topic of wine and olive oil for more than 10 years, and so far I was able to discern 236 sites with the production of wine and olive oil, and they are dated from the 1st till the 11th century AD. So far, the available evidence suggests that in the Eastern Adriatic, the wine and olive oil production was exclusive to the countryside and Villae Rustice during the imperial period. That's from 1st to the 3rd century AD. It's quite a stark contrast to the situation in other cities around the Mediterranean, and examples of urban pressing devices are known, for example, from Pompeii, and they are dated to the 1st century. That is something we cannot see in the Eastern Adriatic. However, the situation changed in the late 3rd century because the borders were destabilized and barbarian raids deep into the provincial countryside were reoccurring. And as a reaction to the security breach, not only people but also pressing devices seek relative safety behind the city walls. This phenomenon is called rustification or ruralization of the urban context, and we can recognize it also in other parts of the empire, so it's not specific only for the Eastern Adriatic. Urban pressing devices are evident in the colony of Parentium, Pola, and city of Nesatium in the region of Istria, and colony of Jader and Salona in the province of Dalmatia. What is very interesting is that many of those pressing devices can also be directly linked with the early Christian church. If you ask any researchers focusing on the olive oil and wine production about the dating of the pressing devices, the answer is it's rather difficult because the technology was used for many centuries without a change, and sometimes dating one stone element of pressing device is impossible to exactly date. However, and luckily in the Eastern Adriatic, it's quite easy to discern the late antique pressing devices. And this thanks to the new location, as I mentioned, from the 4th century, pressing devices are also present in cities. They can be found inside of all the residential or public buildings, or built new within the ecclesiastical complexes like churches or monasteries. And the second, new technological solutions. Sometimes we can see the use of cheaper materials or the spolium. Very often we can find funerary monuments or parts of the monumental architecture from the early imperial period recut as a part of the pressing devices or olive mills. Also, for example, press beds can be made of multiple stone slabs. It's something that was not imaginable in the beginnings of Roman Empire. Also, what is specific to the Eastern Adriatic is a new type of counterweight used for the prelom pressing device. It's something I call the pair of stone stipites. We can see it on this picture up here. It's a pair of very large, massive stone columns which were interconnected by a wooden axis. So based on the location and the technology, I was able to discern altogether 64 sites dated to late antiquity or the early Middle Ages, which is quite a large number. If you remember, the exact number is 236 sites. And from this number, 64 can be dated to late antiquity. Here is ideal reconstruction of the typical late antique pressing device from the Eastern Adriatic. We can see this large stone elevated surface. It was forum, paved by stone slabs. On it, it's a base for arbora, the two wooden columns which were holding this long prelum. It was the lever. And here is the press bed with the basket filled with fruits. It can be the trodden grapes or the crushed olives. Here is the large channel connecting the press bed with the stone container placed under the forum. And here on the other end of the prelon is the mentioned pair of stone stipites, which is the new type of the counterweight. I will start with the city of Salona because I was able to visit this archaeological park mid-February this year, and I have pictures of the several pressing devices which were excavated in this colony. The problem with Salona is that only 20% of the city was excavated so far, and most of it was excavated by the end of 19th century or beginning of 20th century. So most of the excavations are very, very old, and they are not very well published. So what I did is the new analysis of the available stone monuments in situ. So in Salona, there is 7 sites connected with the production of wine or olive oil. Here on the left, it's press bed of pressing device found near the Horeum. Next to it, it's fragment of another press bed found near Porta Suburbana. And on the right side, here is again the typical new counterweight pair of stone stipites on the site of 5 bridges. Those 3 sites cannot be directly linked with the early Christian church. However, the other sites can be linked with the church itself. Here is the pressing device on the former city forum. During the Diocletian reign, the city forum was flanked by a new portico made of very high quality white stones. It was sandstone. This portico was later destroyed by the barbarian raid, and it was covered by new buildings. In the western part of this portico, new ecclesiastical complex was erected. Here was the oratory and also a new building with this pressing device you can see on the pictures. And the space where the pressing device was placed was paved by the secondarily used beautifully carved parts of the portico. Also, this press bed and the counterweights and the channel, all stones were actually secondarily used. In Salona, Episcopal Quarter definitely is the most interesting feature from the late antiquity. It was constructed in the 5th century. You can see on the ground plan 2 basilicas. The first phase is from 5th century, while the southern one was rebuilt in 6th century. Here on the north, by the number 8, the blue one, it's the palace of the bishop. You have also this large main street. Everything was newly constructed during the 5th century. Inside of the bishop palace, you have 2 rooms. It's so-called olive oil and wine shop, because inside multiple stone vessels for storage of wine and olive oil were excavated. And this space was directly linked to the palace itself. And what we presume is that the liquids here were for the direct consumption of the bishop and his household. And more interestingly, Next to the main road, you can see this small room on the east, where the pressing device itself was built. This is the current state. It's quite badly visible among the grass, but you can see the base for arbores and the pavement of the elevated forum. On this 3D reconstruction, which is very interesting, you have those green areas, open space, next to the palace of the bishop. You can see it here on the ground plan, and it was reconstructed as a garden and probably orchard. And I think it's quite possible that olive trees or maybe grapes were produced here for the pressing device, which was connected to the palace and the bishop household, and was actually mean that it was self-sufficient and it was independent on the Villa Rustice outside of the city because of the dangers of the barbarian raids. It wasn't so safe, so this was the way how the bishop's household was always stocked with the olive oil and wine. This situation is actually very similar to the situation on the city of Delos and also the city of Bilis. So it's not the unique occurrence in the Mediterranean. It was happening all over the Mediterranean when the bishop's household always wanted to have enough of wine and olive oil for its function. In Salona also we have two large cemeterial basilicas. One is at Manastirine, one and Kapliuch. They were constructed in the same time period during the 4th century on the place where the early Christian martyrs were buried. You can see on the ground post it's very complicated, multi-layered structures. It was constructed, reconstructed, and destroyed multiple times. And both of those basilicas were also equipped by the pressing devices. You can see one here, this is the Kapliuch Basilica on the north side. And another pressing device was at Manastirine near this chapel number 7. What is interesting, the establishment of those pressing devices is exactly the same. The chronology is the same. It was the end of the 6th century or the early 7th century. By the time, those basilicas were partially destroyed, but still some activities like the Mass, they were still held there. But it's very interesting that also in this very late period, because Salona was destroyed by the end of the 6th century and during the 7th century, it was slowly abandoned and the population moved to the near Diocletian's palace, today in Split. But still, in this late period, two pressing devices were installed there, so the function of the church still was present, and it was needed to produce wine and olive oil on site. So you can see the situation today. This is the pressing device at Manastirine. It's the typical example of late antique pressing device. You can see the pair of stone stipites here. Here is the press bed and vase for arbores. Here is the mola alaria, which is an olive mill. Similar type of pressing devices at Kapliuch. Also pair of stipites. I hope you can see it on the picture. It was made secondary from the highest quality white marble, probably from Procnus. So we can see now clearly that didn't matter to them at all. They used all the material available on site. Also this high quality, very expensive marble for such a mundane thing as is the counterweight for pressing device. Now I will move to the Histria. This is the colony of Pola, today city of Pula, quarter of St. Theodore. The name of St. Theodore, it was given by the 15th century church, which was actually built on the same place as the early Christian church of St. Lucy from the 5th century. The church is in the blue circle. And next to the church also the monastery was built. This is all those walls in the purple color. It was quite large complex. And also inside of this monastery, pressing device was built. We can see some secondarily used parts of the pressing device here upon those pictures. This church was destroyed by fire at the end of the 7th century. The pressing device also was destroyed, and it was later reused only for the stone parts. What is interesting, and it's the similar situation like in the Episcopal Quarter in Salona, in the green rectangle, this is the space where the garden was made, and probably it was for the olive trees. So again, we can see the situation when not only pressing devices were present in cities, but also those olive orchards or maybe also some grapevines were cultivated on spots right next to the pressing devices. Another very interesting pressing device from colony of Pola, today at the Plac Jusova Street. On the pictures you can see the typical late antiquity pressing device, the press bed made of 2 separate stone slabs with the stone recipient right next to it. And here it's not well visible, but it's again pair of stone stipites used as the counterweight. This pressing device was built right next to the new city wall. It's this huge construction right next to the pressing device. It was made by using a lot of spolia. This pressing device can be also linked with the Basilica of Santa Maria Formosa, which was constructed in the 6th century thanks to the Archbishop of Ravenna, Maximianus. He was very active in Pola during his mandate, and many new churches and monasteries were built thanks to him. Now we are moving to the colony of Parentium, today's city of Poreč, also in Istria. On the exact spot where the Cardo Maximus and Decumanus Maximus met, right in the center of the colony, a new building was constructed in late antiquity, probably in the 5th century, maybe beginning of the 6th. The datation is not very clear. 2 pressing devices were installed inside of the building. You can see here they are huge, one of the largest pressing devices in Istria, and they used a bit different type of the counterweight. It's this huge, secondarily used 1st century, very expensive funerary monument, which was reused, recut to make this huge counterweight. We can connect this building, construction of this building, with the Bishop Euphrasius, which built the large Basilica Euphrasiana, today also beautifully preserved in the city of Poreč. So we can assume that production of those 2 pressing devices was linked also with the ecclesiastical economy to supply the church with the olive oil in this case. And the last one, it's not a colony, Nesatium was a municipium. It's in the southern Istria. And here we can observe how deep the changes in the society were during the late antiquity, because in the building of the public terme, positioned on the forum of Nesalstium, new pressing device was built using again a lot of spolia with the counterweight type of the pair of stipites, again typical late antique pressing device, and we can directly connect it with the Basilica Gemina built here on the city forum. So I will conclude now to hold the time. Dating of the pressing devices in the Eastern Adriatic is very difficult. Surprisingly, it's easier to discern those late antique pressing devices because of their new locations in the urban context, and also those new technological solutions like the pair of stone stipites as the new type of counterweight. Also, very often the use of the earlier stone monuments, funerary monuments, parts of the architecture from the early imperial periods. Also now the link between the pressing devices and the early Christian church is more visible than it was before. Thanks to the revision of old research, I was able to connect quite a lot of those late antique pressing devices with the church, with the monasteries, or other types of ecclesiastical context. Coincidentally, those early Christian pressing devices were often used, the pair of stone stipites, as counterweight. So would it be possible to trace down this like a church-founded innovation in technology which was used solely for the church supply of wine and olive oil? So this is a very important question, and I think it might be possible because, as Paulina also mentioned before me, church was very active, especially in this type of production itself. So maybe we can think a step further as the church being someone who paid for some technological innovations and then hold it for itself. And those pair of stone stipites might be used directly by the church itself. So it's one of the questions. If you have some ideas, I would be happy to discuss later. And also another interesting thing is that in the Eastern Adriatic, so far the urban production of wine and olive oil can be traced only in the late antiquity, which is quite stark, different to the all other parts of the Mediterranean where the urban presses are present also from the late Republican and then early imperial periods. So the question is it because of the current state of research? Because especially in Dalmatia, we don't have many recent excavations, especially not in the urban context? Or maybe is it something like another local peculiarity, because the Eastern Adriatic so far is very peculiar, especially in the context of the production of wine and olive oil. So we will see how it goes.
So thank you very much, Jana, for showing us the jump from trade and distribution to production of olive oil and wine. And thank you again for being so nice in time, which gives us enough room for the last speaker in this session. And this is Andreas Heiss. So I know he's an archaeobotanist because we work together in Ephesus, of course. And he's a member of the ÖAI, so the Österreichisches Archaeologisches Institut. And since 2024, he is also head of the Archaeology lab in Vienna. So he is going to talk about burnt to a crisp to fire events in early Byzantine Ephesus and their implications for the reconstruction of plant-based foods. So please take the floor.
Thank you, Joanita, for the kind introduction. And thank you, the organizers, for kindly inviting me here. Thanks for having me here. I will show you a few things from current studies that are going on in late antique and early Byzantine Ephesus. This presentation also sort of serves as an introduction, a general introduction that is also valid for Archaeological lecture in the afternoon. So I'm presenting a bit more of the sites. Let's immerse you into the place where we're working currently. So yeah, Ephesus is, of course, the most important excavation for our institute because 130 years ago, the Austrian Archaeological Institute was founded, particularly for this excavation. And well, I'm just giving you a few visual impressions. The aerial photo covering the urban area, some architectural highlights. So the so-called Temple of Hadrian to the left, and the Corridus Streets, the Celsus Library, and the Harbor Theatre. One thing I generally always want to outline is the history of the landscape and the changes of the landscape, because in the end, it doesn't just affect where the people settled, but it also brought with it very particular problems and challenges, be it in construction and urbanism, but also in agriculture. I will be very quick about these. This is just going through different excavations in different phases in the area. I just want to point your attention particularly to the map on the bottom right. So these are the reconstructed coastlines through the millennia. And the thing is that the Küçük-Menderes River here in the western Anatolian coast, as all the rivers they bring their sediments with them, they lead to heavy siltation. So the coastlines constantly shifted towards the west. And the first settlements, so even the Neolithic one, even if they are now 15 kilometers east of the coastline, they were directly at the sea. So these were really, beach settlements, whatever. And the same is true for the 15th and 14th century settlements. So these were all coastal, and the coastline moved towards the west, and so did the settlements. So what we can call Ephesus was basically founded after the death of Alexander the Great in 300 BC as Arsin. So this was founded in the area of where the later settlement phases still continued. So actually this from this period onwards, the settlement did not shift anymore, which posed huge problems in later centuries actually. So to the west we had a lagoon landscape that could not yet be colonized or otherwise used. This is the area during the greatest expansion of the city of Ephesus during Roman imperial period, which is more or less the extension until the 3rd century AD. What is also very important about this phase is, if you look at the map to the bottom right, the coastline had already shifted too far away from the city, so the harbor could only be maintained from the Roman imperial period by constructing a harbor basin and a harbor canal connecting the city still to the west. And this canal has been in continual use until the 7th century, when it was abandoned, and basically also the harbor was dysfunctional. But 7th century was, a phase of many difficulties. So if we focus on late antique Ephesus, basically beginning with the 4th and 5th centuries AD, a new phase of growth and importance came to Ephesus because it started off as a Christian pilgrimage site. So here you have St. Mary's Church as one of the spiritual centers. To the east, the Byzantine Palace, and the geophysical maps around it, they show that the dense development of this area. And basically the layout initially conformed to the Roman period layout and street orientations, but like with the coming centuries towards middle and late Byzantine, this orientation was succeedingly just abandoned gradually. Here we are in the city quarter south of St. Mary's Church. This is like an area directly embedded in the spiritual and administrative center of the city. Was the target of investigation excavated between 2011 and 2018, covering an area of about 2,000 square meters. And this entire building complex was constructed in the way of a Roman insula, burned down completely in the second half of the 7th century. And this fire produced a snapshot of daily life under massive layers of fire debris. The difficulty with this is that this area was continually used. So rooms were shifted walls were reconstructed after this massive destruction. There were fillings brought into some of the floors. So we have a multi-phase stratigraphy, actually currently still working on untangling some of the details, but more or less until the 7th century, most is now quite clear. The biggest building unit was actually a private residence here in the left of the excavated area, with large representative rooms, ornamental floors. Here we have an apsis room to the right with an obosectile floor. But there were also workshops, handicraft shops, production facilities, such as pressing devices. We will see a little bit more of that, and as well as merchants. So we have thousands of coins, scales and weights and everything. In general, the find material is immense in all material categories. So notabene, we finished the excavations in 2018. We are still far from completing the material analysis, and this goes to all the material groups, be it ceramics, animal bones, plant remains, glass. Still lots of work to do. Yeah, so this is just for the appetite, a few highlights and nice thingies, like the glass unguentaria, which were preserved in a hole, or here is a part of a cage cup. It's also very special. It's already been published. Yeah, there's also these pilgrimage flasks. They were mass-produced as souvenirs for the pilgrims. We will see lots of them later. When we go to the archaeobotanical work, or not only archaeobotany, but all the, so to speak, microarchaeological materials, this is a very important case study, the city quarter, because from each stratigraphical unit, at least one soil sample per square meter was taken for not just for plant macro remain analysis, but for all tiny bits and pieces that you can find in a city residence. And this is the first excavation site in Ephesus that was really this intensely sampled. And this is due to the efforts of mainly Sabine Ladstätter and Ursula Tannhäuser. Up to now, about 845 soil samples are already analyzed. Also, there was quite some charcoal analysis going on with focuses on construction timber, on furniture. We have a wonderful furniture assemblage, which I'm not going to show you because I'm focusing on food. Yeah, the processing, I probably don't need to explain flotation, but the one thing I really want to emphasize every time I'm talking about it, this is not just for us archaeobotanists, but it delivers so many tiny fragments of all material categories that it's really useful for all the disciplines involved in excavations. So it's not just for us. The results. Just to give a few numbers and some first visual impressions. So 511 soil samples, about 8,000 liters of sediment have now been analyzed. Quite some species. So it appears very rich. I will relativize this a little bit later. Also lots of charcoal analysis going on. As said, I'm not going to present these, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview of like what's going on with cultivated crops, for example. So it's actually a well-known spectrum for Ephesus from the Roman imperial period. So the main cereals were basically the same, so some free threshing wheat, barley, and emmer wheat. This is something we know from earlier periods. We have chickpeas, fava beans, lentils are also there. But from cultivated fruit trees, there's fig, of course. I mean, it's inevitable; it's everywhere. Olives, pine. Pomegranates, so these are not seeds, but parts of the out hard shell of the fruit. So all in all, it's a really nice, not just Mediterranean, but I'd rather say Eastern Mediterranean spectrum of cultivated plants. A bit more special are the vegetables, so the remains of vegetable plants and condiments. because they are just notoriously hard to track in the Botanical record. It's really difficult to find something. So we were really happy to find beets, so some variety of beetroot. We have bottle gourd. We have fenugreek. So speaking of tastes of antiquity. And at this point, I also have to emphasize, to give you an impression of the amounts of materials. So we have approximately 10,000 finds now analyzed, and in the data set, there's still, I expect another 10,000, I guess, before we are finished. But the find density is incredibly low. So this is really, in many places in this building, we have find densities around 1 seed per liter of sediment. So this is really something where this high resolution really pays off, because if we had only sampled the interesting contexts, we would have lost most of the information about anything. And of course, extremely low find densities, they become more understandable when we look at spatial distributions at the room functions. So we have representative rooms, we have lots of residential areas, and those, of course, did not contain per se huge amounts of food. These were just not the places. So as an early experiment on the spatial distribution analysis, for example, let's take grapevine and olive, so just some distribution as we found them in the building. I've omitted all occurrences that are like singular or very few, so because there would have been lots of tiny lines without a bar. And it's really nice concerning the function of rows and of implements. So the highest concentration of olive stones is in a room with a pressing device. So it should have been an olive press. And the same is for the grapevine. So there's about 320 finds of grape pips, conveniently right in the room from which another press was accessible. So I think it's safe to assume it was a wine press. What we still do not know is what this room 2.6 was doing, because this has no relation to any apparent function in wine processing. So there's still things going on, and a final analysis will hopefully complete this picture. I will not bother you with the huge amount of white plants. It's just like maybe you want to bask your eyes in the diversity of shapes and not colors, but at least textures. So these finds in the end will help us understand agricultural regimes of the crop plants, and also we hope to gain insights in the history of the city quarter after the big destruction, including subsequent uses that we suspect for example, the 12th century. So this will definitely help a lot. Just one tiny highlight, which has nothing to do with food, but I just find it so charming. It's really amazing to me. Sorry. So there's a group of algae, the Carophyceae, and they produce these tiny little eggs, you could say. So it's permanent stages. These plants only occur in permanently stagnant water. So it's, if you have a puddle that is there for 2 weeks, they will not grow. So you need a nice amount of water for a longer time. And where do we find them? In the peristelium, which is where we should have had water basin. So this is just nice. And it's just to highlight some of the things that I'm really sure are going to come up in the coming years. Another thing was more puzzling, also has nothing to do with food, but a huge concentration of heather leaves in one room. Although already at the current stage, the stratigraphy points towards something much younger. So really after the destruction of the rooms, discontinuation of their use as living areas, but more probably as stables. So this would be really nice if it helped. If we move away from the Byzantine city center and go to the south, to the upper city. So this commercial quarter was partially excavated between 2022 and 2024. And it's really a sensational find in every aspect. The area with several tabernae burned down completely in the year 614 or 615 and was completely abandoned thereafter. So the ruins were like subsequently filled up with Aeolian sediments, but never used again. Everything is still here. And the nice thing is, a very charming hypothesis from the 1970s, that during the Persian campaign to Constantinople, groups of Sassanids raided the western area. And here in the city quarter, we have quite a lot of arrowheads. We have quite a lot of spearheads. There was no raiding, which would fit the strategy of just creating burnt, scorched earth. Incredible amounts of finds, lamps, amphora, drinking cups. Now several hundreds of these pilgrimage flasks sold as souvenirs. Also very expensive objects, such as this bronze lamp. There's thousands of glass files, a lot. And we have only just begun. From my point of view, the most important and interesting finds were all those plant materials that were found in situ, like burnt, whatever, and so this is also very rare. I will not talk about the fish bones here in this picture because we will hear a lot about them later. There's, for example, a huge storage vessel with chickpeas, lots of them. This is something that is very promising for the functional analysis of everything and like reconstructing the chaîne opératoire of the food at sur place. We have rotary querns that are still in situ with their contents still in the. So there's my dear colleague Laura Dietrichs, who was so nice to help us with the sampling. And this is also something like phytolith and starch granule analysis that is going to be carried out in the coming time. Yeah, we got chickpeas, lots of them, about 7,000 from one vessel. I'm thinking about things like geometric morphometrics being probably useful on such a huge amount, because we really do have, it looks like different morphogroups. Maybe they are stable, maybe they function. We also today have two distinct morphogroups of chickpeas, like the Desi and Kabui types. Maybe we can do something similar. We also have storage pests, in this case a weevil, like numerous, quite a few of them. We have fruit trees, very nice spectrum. Actually, the type of remains shows us that in these tabernae, these fruits were obviously sold as a whole. So, like we don't just have from the pines, we don't just have the seeds, but we also have the bracts from the cones. So we think that they were sold like entire objects. So we got plums, walnuts, olives, pine nuts, peach, almonds, pomegranate, grapevine. And one of the next questions is going to be like, okay, which of these foods were just sold and which of them were prepared sur place for consumption and for either the merchants themselves or for takeaway to be sold. There's still an enormous amount to do. New questions, some answers also coming up constantly. And thank you once again for having me here, and thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Andrea, for this wonderful explanation about the latest results from excavations in Ephesus. It's a large city, of course, and also produces large quantities of material and evidence and plant remains, as we have seen. Before we start asking questions to the four speakers in this session, I also would like to give the online participants the possibility to ask any questions. Did they already ask any questions in the chat? Can you formulate your question to one of the speakers, and to whom is the question, actually? Evie Margaritis, can you come to the front?
Hello. Hello. Thank you for a super presentation. I wonder if you could clarify a bit the distinction you made between ritual dining and food offered on altars. And the question is, could they be mainly the same foods, that people are eating the same food, part of which it is offered to the god? Or is the offering to the god normally different from what the ritual diners are eating?
I think they're the same. In terms of species, I think they're the same. The interesting thing for me, at least, it would be to if we can actually reconstruct the actual activity. If they were offered just to be offered as an act, a separate act, and then some of the cohort of the food remains, they were then eaten by the participants. It's very difficult, the distinction, archaeologically, to get it, but with fine excavation, I think it can be done. But the species are the same.
Is it possible in some ways that they were eating with the god?
That's a supernatural question. I know what you mean. I know what you mean, but I don't know how you can answer that.
Okay, I hope this answers your question. Okay, now, my Evie, that you're here at the front, maybe there are also people here in the public who would like to ask questions. I see a hand raised over there.
My question concerns, have you found any evidence in the archaeological record of long-distance traded objects, like peppercorns, for example? Given the fact that you have, in previous presentations, you have found interesting summaries showing that you would have such objects in culinary recipes, that would be really interesting also to find in the archaeology.
Yes, definitely. Maybe first on the imported goods. Up to now, nothing where we could really say, okay, this does definitely not grow in the area. In terms of recipes and foodstuffs, actually, what really is a deep wish of mine is like, if we could get in the end something like, I don't know, a chickpea mash with fenugreek. It really depends on what comes out of the mills. And also there are food crusts, which we're just currently facing the challenge of gathering them when everything is done and finding an SEM facility in Turkey and have them analyzed. Because with the light microscope, you don't jump too far with this kind of remains. And so this will hopefully also generate quite some nice insights. We do, however, have botanical evidence for imported goods, direct evidence, and it is wood. So the furniture assemblage that I was mentioning earlier, it consists to the main part from walnut, which is nothing special for the region, except for the carvings that are still preserved. I'm so sorry. No, I'm so happy about this material and I can't stop grinning. But the other part of this furniture assemblage was made from taxus, from yew wood. And this is definitely something you would not find on the western coast of Anatolia, but you would find it on the Black Sea coast. And there's also numerous wine amphora from the region. So this, basically the only botanical find where we really can pinpoint this is definitely long distance transport.
Can I quickly add something on this? Because you asked about pepper, and I know that my colleague at University of Groningen, Professor René Kappers, wrote a lot about black pepper because he worked at the site of Berenike on the Red Sea, where they had immediate import from India through the Indian Ocean trade coming into the Red Sea. And it's important to know he actually excavated Ephesos, a large storage jar with thousands of pepper, and that he analyzed for his book Roman Footprints, it's called. It's important to keep in mind that Berenike was a commercial center, a coastal site, and that's why we have imports of black pepper in archaeological context. Because if you go to big consumption sites like Ephesus or Rome or Istanbul, you cannot find any pepper because it was eaten, you know. we need to go to coastal commercial sites in order to find these ingredients. Yeah, I want to.
Following to what you're saying, we have found peppercorns at Portus. Yes, it hasn't been published, but we have found, yes.
Again, an important harbor and coastal commercial site. Okay, thank you. I hope this has answered some of your questions. Yes, I see more hands raised. Yeah.
This was really very exciting news about your research. And my question, of course, goes to Effie about these remains of processed food, because I thought this highly thrilling. And there was not so much time to go a little bit deeper. But so maybe you can tell a little bit more. But this also might be in the direction of John's question about eating together with the gods. Maybe this might be some case of sharing, or what do you think?
Well, as it comes for the plant remains themselves, as Andreas said, in order to go further for the identification, you need an SCM, a scanning electron microscope to go further. In some cases, we have found remains like a dough of wheat and figs. So you can have some of bread or a pie. And we need to analyze those. But the quantities, it's not what they are, but it's the quantities as well, that they were brought into the sanctuary. Processed food, it was no crops and seeds. Now, I don't know in what level this is going to go with eating with the gods, but as in every offering, it is the essence of offering that if you offer something, you want the deity to come closer to whatever activity you have. So in that sense, this goes with the gods or for the gods.
But would it be some case of Koliva?
Yes. It could be that. Okay, but Koliva, of course, is more related to funerary, but you do have the same, and it's actually very interesting because you have the same, in the funerary context, that you have the same species that you have at Koliva now. So, okay, there's a correlation there.
It's not really a question. I just wanted to make a comment that springs from Effie's and Andreas's presentation. Most of researchers who study these bioarchaeological remains, let's say, are a bit like the early Christians who go about and spread the word. And I think that these two presentations really did that job very effectively. They actually showed us how much we can learn once we decide to do proper sampling and water flotation and analysis, timely analysis of the finds in a contextual way. And once that is done, and I think that Eddie's presentation showed it very aptly, when we do that, then new challenges arise. And I think all those questions about eating with the god or without the god or whatever shows it very clearly. People used to do things in the past, and they used to write about these things. Those do not necessarily, they don't coincide necessarily. They serve different purposes. And for us, looking at the coincidences and non-coincidences between the two kinds of sources can be very revealing regarding the social questions we ask. I think what we've heard today really helps us understand how powerful this kind of analysis can be. And I would have to ask those of you who are into Byzantine archaeology and Byzantine studies, please try applying these methodologies to Byzantine excavations too. They are very rare, but you can see how much we can learn about life past.
But Petra, of course, you're correct. It's a good thing that I speak on for Greece now. Cyprus, that now I work there as well, that a lot of people that they're actually have excavated historical periods to sample. And because of the work of some people that had done in the past, now you have PhDs, new PhDs, that they are focused on the historical periods. And I don't know any systematic excavation of the historical periods, apart from the Byzantine that you're right, but we don't excavate the Byzantine sites, unfortunately. We excavate churches, but never mind. Maybe this will change. they all take samples. And the good thing is that in the past, I was reaching out to them, saying, oh, maybe you want to do this in a classical excavation. Now, this has been reversed. And I wanted to say a comment that like 20 years ago, when I had my first postdoc in the American School of Classical Studies, one of the members there excavating a very famous site of Greece, which I'm not going to reveal. So I said, yeah, well, do you want to do flotation? And he looked at me and said, Evie, inscriptions do not float. So this is, it has changed completely since because of the work of that we have done in Greece, but it shows what the situation was some years ago.
Okay, thank you very much for these comments. And I just want to add something to the very rightly things that you both said. I think it's also important to train students, not only PhDs, but also master and bachelor students, to work with bioarchaeological contexts in the future. We need to train a new generation, because I have many students in Leiden, but they work only on things from the prehistoric contexts, and we need to inform them and tell them that they should also work on Byzantine and later times as well. And it's only slowly that this is happening. But the training of new generation is also important. Yeah.
For Paulina, I think. The interesting growth in wine production is gas, which I think is seen a little bit in one or two literary sources. Very interesting. But the question is, were they filling a gap in the market? Or did production from elsewhere somehow die away? Or were they competing? How did they get into the market? And why did they build up so quickly? Any ideas?
So now, when the agent-based modeling also suggests that it's not true that some products from the West were transported in barrels, we can actually think that the disappearance of the Western products opened new markets for the Eastern ones. This is why the production developed so much, but also it might have been somehow associated with the, let's say, fashion, that the Gaza was the Holy Land, so people wanted to buy products from this area precisely. But still, what we observe based on the total numbers of amphoras consumed in Italy, there might have been new place in the market. However, the total consumption demand, for example, from the West, actually decreased a lot during late antiquity because of the population of Rome, especially. Yes, so. But definitely it was like a new opening for the Levant, and also Cyprus and Cilicia, because we also see the growth, smaller growth, but of the amphoras from this area in the West.
And also for you, Joanna, let's say I want to make a comment that will connect the full presentation and your introductory lecture this morning. And we've touched about the question of medicine and food. And let's say the question of archaeology, getting as much as we can about the plant residues. Archaeology is changing. I've been doing what I'm doing for 50 years. And maybe 40 years ago, I was asking archaeologists to get flacons, vials with perfumes. At that time, the goal was to get the best pieces of glass, shining glass. I was begging to have analysis of this kind of stuff. And I have seen collections in which the vials were full of remains, but there was no way to get that. And my point was exactly what the four speakers told us. We can get a lot of things from that. Of course, personally, I'm interested in the plants, but there is also the culture, the society, the economic structure of the groups, etc. Who uses what kind of perfume, what lady were using, and this kind of stuff. So it's a gold mine. all that. Unfortunately, archaeology is changing its focus, but not enough yet. And I fully agree with you, Joanna, that we should push students to get exposed to that, not at the level of a master or a PhD, but at the basic level, not at 101, of course. But let's say we should absolutely encourage this kind of stuff because we are missing something which is fundamental and which could reveal a lot of information that we don't have from any other source. So I want to thank the four speakers and the lecturer, of course, and I would like to encourage the assembly to go in that direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your wonderful comment. Okay, I see more hands raised. Yeah.
I know very little about crops and species of it, but I'm very interested whether any of you have done any DNA sequencing on seeds, grains that you find. And the reason that might be of some interest is because, as you probably know better than anyone else, mycotoxins that grow on grains, and these mycotoxins are toxins. So, and they are very, very powerful toxins. I'm sure Antiquity had an idea. It wasn't just visual. They would have the experience of consuming it. So, did they make choices in terms of these toxins the mycotoxins would grow both while the grains grow as well as storage. And storage are the more lethal ones. So did they separate between the two? And perhaps the gods could afford to eat the mycotoxins or mycotoxined material while the humans could not?
Going to try to answer this question because it's a big one, but a very, very good one. I mean, in terms of pest management, disease management of crops, for example, until now we have to mostly rely on the written sources. The thing is a problem of preservation, that the carbonized preservation that helps us find the plant remains because it makes them basically invulnerable to chemical decay for thousands of years. It is very bad for DNA to preserve. So there are punctual examples where fragmented DNA strands could be extracted from charred remains, but it's usually with an inconclusive result because it's just so denaturated, it's broken into pieces and turned into something else. The charring process it's super destructive, although it preserves our materials. There are few exceptions. Ergot is one, for example, because ergot produces the sclerotia, which are hard. They preserve they preserve in charred state. And in many archaeological excavations, you can really see if you have large grain stocks, you can really see, okay, here is, 10,000 grains and 5 ergot sclerotia, or the contrast where you have 5%, 10%. And you can really imagine how dangerous this must have been for people and how poor they must have been not being able to separate it because people knew. And if you have to keep it in your grain storage, it can also go into intentional consumption, but
The color would give it away.
Yeah, definitely.
On the gray, give it away, so there were no elite.
Yeah. You see them. In many cases, you can sieve them out, but not all of them, because there is also some there that are the same size of cereal grains.
But you never find non-charred grains? It's always charred?
We do. It's just, especially the Mediterranean, it's just a matter of environmental factors. So the waterlogged material that Effie presented from the Heraion in Samos, this is really the exception, that you have permanently water-saturated soil if you have these conditions and it's not like periodically drying out, you get uncarbonized plant materials in all shapes and colors and hundreds or thousands times more than you find in dried state. It's just that these conditions usually do not exist inside settlements because people just don't settle in swamps, with the exception of lakeshore settlements. They are really nice. So it's really just a preservation bias.
But there is a word in ancient Greek for moldy gray. So if they have a word,
Can you?
and I'm thinking of Evrotios Sitos, and Evros is the pivotal word there because it means exactly mold, but in ourselves, in the way we interpret it, it's a form of life, it's a fungal, but in their way, it's old age. Yeah. So the grain got older, so it's a proteon cytos. And I find that fascinating because it is total awareness of what you should eat and what you should not eat, as well as the color, as well as whatever else.
And you wouldn't even need the advanced observation to see okay, when I eat more of this, I get sick. It's just they are also not appealing in kind of tastes and smell. So if you had the choice and were able to select your grain and choose it or discard, people knew, and they did.
Okay, thank you. I see some more hands raised. Question over there.
A side remark for Dr. Kopáčková. Sorry for the pronunciation. I just wanted to thank you for reminding us something that is well known in the history of science and technology, namely that the church was a major sponsor for certain technological innovations until early modernity and beyond even. And this has immense historiographical value. So thank you.
Thank you. I find it really interesting as this technological innovation in this special type of the country rate of depressing device occurred only in the eastern Adriatic area. So thank you for this comment. And I would be interested in your more thoughts on this topic because before me, no one really noticed this exact thing in the Eastern Adriatic so far. So, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I see another question.
For Paulina Komar, because I noticed that your data from clusters, your dots from clusters. So perhaps the correlation might not be the most efficient statistic method for you. Maybe you could just try the PCA, the principal component analysis, analiza głównych składowych in Polish, because this could help show the groups of dots and may say something more about the reasons why they are grouped. It's just a small about.
Thank you very much. It's a good idea. We actually are doing plenty of stuff on it. As I mentioned, there was regression, then some kind of grouping of amphoras using the heuristic method with probability per annum, agent-based modeling, but the principal component, this will be the next step. So thanks a lot.
For Jana, it is really interesting that the church seemed to be so closely involved in the technology, the development of wine. But what would the church do with a large quantity of wine? I know of one or two rituals in which wine would be used, certainly, but a large quantity.
I don't think it was only for the church, for the Holy Mass and stuff like that. We need to think about those quite large communities in the monasteries and also inside. For example, in Salona, you have seen the large episcopal quarter, and I can only imagine how many administrative workers must be living there inside of the household of the bishop himself. So I think that they were consuming quite a lot of wine every day. And also olive oil, it's not only for the food, also for the lighting. So we also need to think about the large consumption of the lightning oil for the churches, because we have seen those huge basilicas and they're lighted by oil lamps. So it's not only food, it's also for those other purposes.
Should I also ask you, about the difference between the oil and wine production in terms of facilities? I don't know whether it was clear that sometimes those sites were multifunctional, so it could be wine or oil.
But yeah, it's a very difficult question because sometimes you cannot discern from the pressing device itself what was produced on it. Sometimes you have the olive mill next to the pressing device, so you know that the olives were crushed for the pressing. But for the wine production, especially in the Eastern Adriatic, we don't have so many evidences, which is puzzling so far. I have only few definitely evidence sites for the wine production, and they are all very early, for the early imperial period. I so far don't have any wine production from the late antiquity. So it is very interesting, but as I mentioned, Dalmatia especially is not well excavated. It's a huge space, and we have only few very well excavated sites so far, and even if they were excavated earlier, they are not well published. So most of the information, if we still have some, it's in the archives, in the museums or institutions. So I'm working on it. It's slow work. It's paying off, because when I started my research more than 10 years ago during my PhD, I started with 11 sites in Istria and 12 sites in Dalmatia. And so far now, I am at 250 sites. So I'm still working, and I hope that in a few years maybe the number will double or even more.
Thank you.
Can I add something or that? For olive oil production, you need the presses so you can get the oil out. For wine, you don't need a press. You could use it, but you don't need the press. And on the basis of the chronographic record, we have a lot of the processing of wine in the fields. So that's why you don't find the installations. They're in the fields, so they reduce the volume of the pressed grapes to brought in for fermentation. And they're all over in Greece, at least. They're all over Greece. We think that during prehistory that was the case, but certainly during the later periods. And until recently, next to the vines, you had pressing vats or treating vats for the wine production.
For people to drink.
Yeah. And then you put them in baskets or other containers, and you bring them to the side so the volume is reduced, so the labor is less.
Yeah.
I've got a short question for Jana Kopáčková. Maybe a little bit silly one, but referring to what we are speaking already about the court of the bishop and the size of the court and the number of people involved in the functioning of the court, when I saw the pictures, I had an impression that the garden is not particularly large. It's not a big field, or it's not a olive yard. So is it really possible that it could maintain the consumption of olive and wine for the whole court? Would it be more, like I said, maybe it's a silly question, but is it more probable that they will supply their needs from outside? They could just buy enough oil and wine and stock it for the bad times and have some other less kind of industrial, let's call it, plants. I don't know, some herbs or some other oily seeds that needed a press, but not necessarily olive oils, which, as you mentioned, were used in enormous quantities, and the garden is not that large. I don't know. It's, like I said, maybe it's a silly question, but I had such an impression.
We cannot know if it was only the vegetable garden or maybe some fruits were produced there in that open space. Because as I mentioned, Salona was excavated at the end of the 19th century, especially this part of Salona. So we really don't have any direct evidences. What was published is architecture only, because it was in the focus of the archaeologists. They were not archaeologists, even some architects were excavating Salona, and we really don't have no samples. We don't have even ceramics. We don't have small finds. It's not published, so we cannot actually say which rooms were for the accommodation, which were only some representative spaces. And this is the ideal reconstruction, but I think that the garden idea is very nice, and it's something that we can also see in other cities. So I think the idea is here. If it was olive orchard, if it was photograph, fine, we cannot know today. But it's something that was usual also in other parts. But as you said, the space wasn't so large, so we cannot think it was for the all olive oil necessary for the running of the palace or the basilicas. Maybe for some bishops' private cuisine, we don't know. So it depends.
Okay, thank you, Jana. And I just want to comment to this person who's asking these questions. They are never silly questions. Questions are questions. And so please do continue asking silly questions also in the other sessions. I want to thank all the participants here in the audience as well as the participants online for the lively discussion of this session. And of course, last but not least, I would like to thank all 4 speakers for their excellent papers. So thank you again for your presentations.